Good afternoon or good morning everybody. Welcome to today's quick live session, which is all about using style brushes and also creating your own style brushes as well. So that's what we're going to look at over the next 20 to 30 minutes or so. Do feel free to interact with your questions, and then either myself will pick it up or my colleagues Diego and Yulia, who are also hanging out on Facebook and YouTube as well. So let's head over to Capture One. Just need to shift this way a bit so I don't cut myself off. Okay, so we've got this shot from Russell Ord. Oh, that's Brandy, sorry. From Russell Ord photo. So thanks for sharing this shot with us, Russell. And what I'm going to do is just obviously edit the shot, apply a few different style brushes to it, and then we'll also make one which we can use on this shot, and of course any other shot as well. All right, so first of all, we can see that this shot is a little bit on the dark side. So I am going to bring up my exposure just so we get a bit more life into it, like so. So something around there. And then even though the highlights are okay, it's starting to get a little bit warm. So let's pull down the highlights too. And then we're going to add a bit of contrast as well. So let's hide the browser so we've got a bit more real estate as well. So that will do just for some simple edits. Let's hit C on the keyboard, and then let's pull, sorry, try that again. Let's hit C on the keyboard. That's interesting. Notice that the crop tool is sticky, so I can see the crop tool, but I can't crop, so that's an interesting one. So let's fix that rather than avoid the subject. Let's just do a good old quit and restart of Capture One, and I'm pretty sure we'll be all good to go then. So let's do that. Of course, this always happens in a live session. Right, there we go. So now I've got my crop back. So funny one, that one to report to the team. So let's do a small crop, and then that way, that's just a bit of a nicer, more dynamic, maybe a bit too much. Let's go and cut out a bit of the front and keep those trees. Okay, so we've done some basic edits. Let's pull the highlights down a bit more. Also, I'm going to warm it up slightly as well, so it's got a bit more sun warmth going into it. Okay, so now we can move on to the style brush side of things. Now you'll find by default, you'll probably see your style brush tool hovering under here, somewhere in the exposure tool tab. Now, as I'm presenting to you on a smaller screen, this area was starting to get a little bit crowded. So what I decided to do was to make a separate tool tab just for style brushes and layers. If you don't know how to do that, it's very simple to set up. All you need to do is right click anywhere in the tool tab area. So just in this dead space here, or pretty much on any tool, we can right click and say add tool tab, and then you just need to pick custom, like so. And then you can build your own tool tab and add whatever tools you want. So if you say custom tool tab, specify the tab name, so we would call this style brushes. Pick an icon that you want to have. Let's go for a heart and say add tab. And now if we expand out the tool area, now we can see an empty tool tab with no tools. And then all you need to do is right click anywhere in this space and then just add the tools you want. So all I did was add the style brush tool and add the layers tool, as those two kind of work together. So that's why I ended up with this tool tab like so. So I'm going to remove that tool tab because we don't need that one. And then we can go back to this tool tab. So what can we do on this shot just to demonstrate a couple of different things that we can do with the style brushes, and then also how to make your own as well. So first of all, if we open up the built-in style brushes, these are the style brushes that come with Capture One. And we've divided them up into three different sections, if you like, or effects. So color, enhancements, light and contrast. So first of all, I'm going to go to light and contrast, because what I want to do is just darken down a couple of areas. So shadows, sorry, not shadows, darken, there we are, burn, darken. So that's just a general brush which is going to darken down a couple of areas that I wish. Now what these style brushes actually do is a number of things all at once and chain them all together. So it saves you time by adding a few steps into one click of a button, really. So what it'll do, or what a style brush does, is simply set up some adjustments, set up the brush settings like the size of the brush and some other things that we'll talk about, make you a new layer, name the layer with what that brush does, and then just allow you to get to work straight away. So it's a much faster method than setting up all those steps manually. So let us grab the Burn Darken brush. So as soon as I click that, you'll notice my brush cursor tool gets selected. So it's already picked out my brush like so. Now I can move onto the shot and then adjust the size of my brush to fit. So I can either do that with a right click and then bring up my parameters. So I just want to darken down a couple of hot spots. Now deliberately, most of these style brushes that we created have a low flow setting. So you see brush flow is relatively low at the moment, and that's completely deliberate. The idea being is that any of those adjustments you can see down on the left hand side under light and contrast or enhancements or color, the idea is that you can build these up nice and slowly, because you don't necessarily want the full strength of the Burn style brush or the full strength of the Shadows Recover style brush, as an example. So keeping the flow nice and low allows, as you brush with your pen or if you're using a mouse, it just allows the adjustment to build up nice and slowly. So we chose Darken, so I just want to darken down this area on the left hand side. Let's just take the heat off that rock slightly and just off that one here. Now when you're using the style brushes, you might find that actually, did anything happen there? Doesn't look like much change because of that low flow rating. So it's a nice gradual change. But if I turn this layer off, so if I turn my burn layer off, then you can see the subtle difference on those rocks behind, like so. Now a good question from Photo by Friday: how can I see what settings the style brush is changing? Great question. So whilst you're on that layer, just go to any of the adjustments and you can see exactly what that layer is doing. So Burn Darken's pulling the exposure down a tiny bit. I do believe it's also doing a curve change and so on. As we look at other brushes, you'll be able to see what's going on as well. Now there's not like a list that springs up, which I agree would be nice, but you can completely see what's happening with the layer. Okay, so that was just a little cheeky Burn Darken. Nice simple one there. Now if you feel you've gone too far, you've got a couple of choices. So if you think, you know what, I just did that a little bit too much, you can do a couple of things, and this is where this box link, or the link controls, comes in very handy. So the first one we're going to look at is eraser with brush. So I've got this checked in. What this simply means is if I go and grab my eraser, then my brush settings are going to be linked or identical. Sorry, the eraser settings are going to be linked or identical to the brush. So note those figures there. It's roughly 1000, 0, 104. If I go back to the brush and then right click, you can see it's the same. So what it means is if I, let's say if we darken down this area a bit and I decide it's too much, I can easily grab the erase brush and erase it back out at the same rate. So I can brush in at the same speed or strength, and I can erase at the same speed or strength. And notice that the brush in the middle has the erase symbol. If I hit B for brush, then you can see it has the plus symbol. And E for erase, you can see that inner ring is dotted, so visually you know which one you're using as well. So this control, or link control eraser with brush, is really handy, because it does mean if I'm brushing away and I think, oh, too much, I can tap E on my keyboard and then just take it away a little bit as well. So that's a really nice, speedy way to work. Okay, next thing that you can do if you alternatively decided that you've, maybe done a bit too much work, you can always bring down the opacity of the layer as well. So if we roll the opacity back, you can see those areas which I darkened down. So then we can get to a comfortable place. Now I'm happy with what I did there, but on the next brush that we're going to use, then this really actually lends itself to using opacity. Warren, I think, says, can you master reset style brushes back to original settings if you change them? You won't actually change them, Warren, so don't worry. Even if let's say in this particular brush here, if we went into this layer and then I change something, that doesn't affect the next time I use the brush. It's only for this time. But that's really valid. Like if you've done some adjustments and you want to alter it slightly, there's nothing to stop you going into the adjustments and doing so. But it won't affect the future use if I did another burn style brush on this photo, or if I did it on the same photo, it's going to be those settings. Okay, so the next one that I just want to play with, which helps to see two things. One, the usefulness of opacity, and secondly, if I right click, what the brush with layer link does as well. That's super useful. So I'm going to grab soft flare, and once again, as soon as I start brushing on the photo, it's going to add me a new layer. So keep your eyes peeled up there, name that layer and so on. Before I do that, I want to make my brush bigger, because what soft flare is going to do is give us a bit of a fake lighting effect coming in from the right hand side. So I've got this enormous brush and I'm just going to drag it around, and it's going to be too much, but then we're going to bring it back down with the opacity. So something like that. So that's a little bit too aggressive on that side. So if I bring the opacity down to 0, you can see what's happened. So I can gradually pull that up and just get myself a little bit of flare. I can just touch in a couple more spots there, maybe one down there, but it's nice and subtle. So by pulling the opacity down, I can moderate it to exactly where I want it. Obviously up here, it just looks too, a bit on the fake side, maybe even like mist. But let's go for something like that. So the opacity control is really useful and often a speedy way to get a result without having to use the eraser as well. Okay, what was I mentioning? I was going to mention this, link brush with a layer. So this is really good. Let's actually do a third layer just so we can see exactly how it works. So let's take down the saturation slightly. So let's go to the color, and then we're going to grab saturation minus, and then I'm just going to pull down the saturation along the top of it like so. Now that happened relatively quickly, so let's just bring down the opacity so it's just a touch. Okay, so notice what this brush looks like. Now as soon as I go to the soft flare layer, then it remembers the state of the brush as it was when we left that layer, if you like. If I go to burn, it's probably going to get smaller, like so. So it does mean if you want to go back to your layers and tweak them, then you can do so without having to reimagine what the brush settings should be. Now that will only happen if you have the link brush with layer checked on. So I'd say most of you will probably find turning those on are the most useful ways to go about using style brushes, because when we sit back and look at our shot and decide what we're going to do, then you can easily go back in, tweak your opacity, go to the various different layers, do a little bit more that you feel might need doing without having to reimagine what the brush settings would be. So that's huge benefit. Okay, so we've done a few tweaks like so. What if we want to do something but we don't find a style brush that fits those needs? So it's very easy to make one yourself. So I'm going to make a brush that just adds a bit more clarity, maybe a little bit saturation as well. And then we can just use it on our paddle border without affecting anything else. So the way to do that, let's just pull his highlights down a bit more on the background and just a little fine tweak. So let's pull those down. So what do we want to do? So we need to make our own style brush, as I said. So the first step is to make yourself a new layer. Now, It doesn't have to be a filled layer. It can be an empty layer, but the only benefit of using a filled layer is that it will give you an idea of the maximum potential of what the style brush could do. Because if we just do a new layer, and let's call this clarity and sat plus, and then I start playing around with the sliders. So if I just drag the saturation slider, then of course nothing is happening because there's no mask on that layer. So it might be difficult to visualize what the maximum or the potential of that style brush could be. So you can either choose to add a new field adjustment layer, or you can add a layer and then we can right click on the layer and fill that mask. And then now it's operating over my whole shot. So this will be a good way to see exactly what the brush could do. So now if I pump up my clarity, obviously it's going to affect the whole shot. So if we pump up the clarity, we can see what's going on. So obviously max clarity is going to be 100, so that's a bit much. So if I put in, you know, this much clarity, let's also pump in a little bit of saturation, and just to maybe protect the darkest shadows a bit, we could open up either the shadows. Let's see if we open up the shadows a touch as well. So we've got three different things going on with that brush. We're adding some clarity, we're adding a bit of saturation, and we're opening up the shadows a tiny amount as well. And then we've been able to visualize the maximum potential that brush could do. And I say the maximum because the next thing that we want to decide is how you want the brush to be when you start using this style brush. So I'm going to right click. I saw a question Bob was asking, what's the shortcut to get up the brush settings? So with a brush selected, you just need to right click and then decide what size you think would be a good size for this brush. Now the size of the brush is related to the size of pixels on the photo. So this is a GFX 100 shot. So the default size needs to be relatively big. If you're shooting with smaller megapixels, then you might find the values need to be a bit lower. This is a reason why in our style brushes, the ones that are built in, the size of the brush is not preset, except for the iris style brush, because we all use different megapixel cameras, so it's hard to get a default. But if you're always shooting on, you know, a GFX 100 in this case, then you can actually fine tune the brush settings for your custom ones. But I'm going to go for something like that. We're going to have it nice and soft, and I'm going to keep the flow nice and low and the opacity at its maximum. Okay, so we've designed our layer. We're happy with how the default brush settings are going to be. Now we need to actually save this. So if we go to our style brushes tool, you'll find an area called custom style brush. And I'm going to go in here and say save style brush. And we're going to get a list of adjustments that are currently on this layer. Okay, really important. So I played with saturation, shadows, and clarity. And then I want to also save the various brush parameters as well. But if you don't want the size to be part of this style brush, you can of course uncheck it. But I'm going to leave all of those checked and say save. So now I need to give my brush a name. So this is clarity, sat, and shadows plus, like so. And say save. And now if we look in our custom style brushes, it's ready to go. Now that I've built my style brush, I can actually just get rid of this layer, because that was my helper layer, if you like, just to build the brush. So I can get rid of that now. I'm going to choose my lovely custom brush, go over to my shot and set up the brush as I wanted it to, and then as soon as I start painting, it's going to make that brush. And then now we can add a bit of clarity and just open up the shadows in that area as well, like so. So this is a relatively subtle adjustment, but if we turn that layer off and then back on, then you can see what it's doing just in that area. Now if I decide I want to, you know, tweak that brush, I've got two choices. So of course at time of use, if I decide it needs to do more, you know, there's nothing to stop me for playing around with the adjustments ad hoc. But if I feel, you know what, I wish I'd saved this brush with a bit more of a shadow lift or something like that, all I need to do is go back into my Style Brushes tool and just save another version of that brush. That's all. So it's super simple to build your own as well. That being said, there's a lot of different options that are already built in that deal with probably a good proportion of the situations that you're going to come across as well. But to have the ability to access those really quickly and also build your own is a big plus, because doing an edit like this, to have had to build, you know, the layer to set up a burn and then either delete parts of the mask or paint the mask in and then try to figure out what looks best, it's just really not as flexible. So if we disable our layers for a second, so I'm going to hold my Alt key down or Option and then just click on the reset, and then you can see without layers and then with the layers put in like so. And to recap what we did, we just took out a few of the brighter distracting spots. We added our little bit of fake hazy light coming in from the right hand side, reduced that with opacity because it was a little bit strong at full noise, so opacity just makes it nice and natural. Took out a bit of the saturation in the top of the trees, so like so. And then finally we made our own brush which just boosted up the clarity and opened up the shadows a little tiny bit, and also added a touch of saturation as well, and all very easily and quickly done as well. Alex says, is it possible to save a style to use as a gradient rather than a brush? I don't think it is, Alex, actually. You know, I haven't tried, but I've got a feeling the answer is no. But that's actually a really good suggestion. What I guess you could do, Alex, is let's just clone this variant, so in case I mess it up, if I clone this variant, so we're on our clarity sat shadows. If I grab my gradient tool and then just pull the gradient down and let go, it will actually replace what I've done with the brush. So if I turn clarity sat shadows on and off, you could actually do it like that. Just basically, once you've chosen your style brush, so if I grab deep sky and just brush once, all I would then need to do is grab my gradient tool and then add the gradient, and then it will transfer to that. So in a way, Alex, you can. So yeah. So I think that is a worthy workaround. All right. David says, this is very much like a freeform style of editing with no parameters. Love this so much. Yeah, it's just a really nice, fun way to edit. That's for sure. I agree. Obviously, if you want full control, then you can immerse yourself in a full layers workflow with creating layers, dialing in adjustments, adding mask, removing the mask, and so on. But this way, of course, is really speedy to do and works generally most of the time very, very nicely. Okay, David says, I'm seeing a gloss plus and minus in the next version. Well, if you've got ideas for that, David, always feel free to make one and submit as well. How do you copy and paste the brush edits on layers to a second image? Very simple. All you would need to do, so if we, let's see, so we've got some layers. This is one I was messing around with earlier. So don't know what that layer's doing. Let's get rid of that one. So if I wanted to get these layers onto that empty shot, I just need to select both of them. Hold your shift key down, very important. So hold your shift key down and notice this little up down arrow in the top. Oh, actually, we're not going to hold our shift key down because that will hide the dialogue which you need to know about. So don't hold your shift key down. Click on the little up down arrow. It's going to show you where do we want to, or what layers do we want to grab. So I want all three of them, soft flare, burn, darken, and saturation, and say apply. And then it's going to copy those across to that photo as well, as you can see. Whoops, helps if you select it. So now we've got the exact same layers. Now if you're happy to copy paste all of them. Let's reset that so they've gone. If you're happy to copy paste the lot without needing to uncheck anything, this is where you can hold your shift key down and it will just save you a button click. So if we hold down shift and click that, then it will copy all the layers across like so. So easily done, pretty much. Bill says, we need more layers, or we need even more layers now. Yep, so the limit is still 16, but yeah, we could argue that perhaps you guys could do with a few more layers as well. Okay, thanks for joining me for this short live session today as well. Hopefully you found that useful. Join me next Tuesday. I'm going to have a special guest, actually. It's going to be one of our team, R&D team members, to talk about some special new stuff that's coming, which might interest you, at least those for you on the Apple platform. So look out for that same time next Tuesday. There'll also be a webinar next week as well, and they'll probably go up on the Learning Hub and also appear on our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow as well, depending when I get to it. So do keep an eye out for those. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button in YouTube as well, because that simply means whenever we go online, you'll be notified half an hour before we go online, and also at the time the live broadcast starts as well. So it's a good idea to subscribe and click that little bell just so you know when it's going to happen. Thanks everybody for joining today, and we will see you all again soon. Take care and enjoy your evenings. Bye now.